All right, we'll start off in a few minutes. Hi there, man. Welcome. Just give me a few minutes. We'll start once there are a few people here. Just wait a couple of moments. Welcome. Good evening. Just give a couple of more minutes. I have a few more people come in and then we'll start. All right, let's begin. Okay. The basic agenda for today is I'm going to speak about mock tests. So, mock cats is probably the most important portion of your cat preparation. So you start right from why we take a mock cat, how many, and all of those kind of questions. Go on to the different attempt strategies section wise. I'll speak about a few. I'll tell you how you should be getting your own strategy. See, uh, attempt strategy is something you build which should work for you, right? So it depends on your strengths, weaknesses, etc. For you to finally come up with the perfect attempt strategy or the closest you can to such a perfect attempt strategy. And how do you analyze these mocks? Why do you need to analyze, etc. Uh, I'll throw in whatever you know my experiences and what's worked for me, and hopefully you guys can pull something out of it when you are doing this or going through the same stage. All right, so let's start with the basic. How many mock cats, when to start, where, etc. How many? I would suggest anything greater than 10 is a solid number. That's over the next 1 year. I had personally taken around 40 to 50 uh, mocks a year when I attempted CAT in 2018 and 2019. So the reason I went up to 40 or 50 was because there was a lot to improve, right? I was struggling, especially in the first few mocks. Uh, just to place my strategy, it took me a lot of time. So what I used the mocks in general was to prepare my strategy and to find out if I'm improving somewhere. So 40, 50 mocks, I would say the around 20 mocks were when I probably finished or came closest to finishing portions. But you start taking mocks as in when it comes. So I had taken it again. So when to start probably as in when it comes, probably in May or June. That's when the mocks start. At least when I mean mock start, I'm talking about IMS, time, or CL. These are the top three in terms of number of people taking a mock. So I would suggest you guys go at least for one of those, and the other from wherever you can take. So I know a lot of people who taken more than two sets of mocks. Not something I would recommend, but yeah, I'm saying anything above 10 is good. Then depending on how much you require, it could go up to 30, 40, 50. So any two mark sets should give you around 50 marks. And try to make sure that you attempt maximum one mock a day and you have enough time to analyze that mock before you go to the next mock. Again, eventually it's also possible that a lot of us will be only able to take mocks on Saturdays and Sundays. So take a mock on Saturday, take a mock on Sunday, and then analyze over the week also works. But preferably, uh, you want to spend enough amount of time analyzing a mock and getting insights from it, and then you need to have enough time to use that insights fruitfully, right, before you go to take your next mock. So, but yes, this sort of a thing can happen where Saturdays and Sundays you'll have to take marks. Preferably, you'll have to work out your schedule that way. Personally, what I had done was I took mock test series from IMS in time, and then I picked mocks here and there, depending on whenever there were open mocks, etc. Open mocks is something basically each of these coaching centers want to you know uh, get more students, right? So one of the ways they do that is conduct open mocks, mocks which are free and anybody can attend. So you'll find mocks splattered across. I believe IMS conducts three of these, Time conducts a couple. So try and find these marks and take them. One, because you find a lot of test takers, so you're pushing yourself against the best there, and another because it's free, so there's no sense in not trying something new. So go for that. I believe Unacademy also has a series. I don't know when it starts, so you probably have to ask somebody who's been there doing this for a while. But yeah, you find a lot of sources with taking mock tests. I would suggest take proctored mock tests, i.e., take mock tests which have a proper 3 hour timing and all of that. It's just conducted in a particular window where you get your results in a couple of days after conducting the test and all of that. So go with proctored mocks, preferably at least 10, and the sky is the limit after that. Again, not too many. You don't want to take more than one mock a day and things like that, because then there is no point if you can't analyze. So you need to have enough time to analyze and then work on your weaknesses and stuff like that as well. So you got to find a balance there. I think a 20, 30, 40 is your sweet spot. Try and get at least that many number of marks. Again, if you're doing really well in each mark, uh, obviously you feel that you don't want to go ahead, that's okay. But especially for those people who are struggling, you have to attempt more marks, but more than the attempts, you have to also analyze it. So I'll go into how the different mock test strategies and analysis now. Oh, and one more thing. Most of these mock tests generally have scholarship exams. So I would suggest keep your eyes out, peeled for it. I believe Time has an 1 hour scholarship test. IMS has a proper 3 hour mock, after which they give you a scholarship based on your percentile and things like that. So keep your eyes peeled out for that. Other than that, all right, let's start. Uh, let's start with verbal, all right? Attempt strategies. How do you attempt a verbal paper? Now, like most of you should know by now, that verbal has two major portions, the RC and the verbal part. So the traditional approach in all three is that you start from the first question, go to the last question, solve as many as you can. Something that works if you're very, very fast, you're good, you can do this traditional approach, because this is a non-nonsense approach, no nonsense approach, right? Right from when you start to when you end, you're not going to waste any time thinking of any strategy, nothing. You're 100% working on questions. And this works, this really works, only if you're really, really good at that subject. If you're fast, only then this works. Else, what generally people go is, one is a round strategy, and then is the RCVA split. I'll speak about the RCVA split because this is what I had followed. So this probably requires a quick 1 minute to see where the questions lie. Generally, CAT, I think after 2018, followed where you had RC's sets, followed by verbal questions. The last 10 questions would be verbal. But in 2019, they mixed it up. So you have an RC set, a couple of verbal questions, and another RC set. So take a quick minute to see where the questions are, the first question of each RC and things like that. It shouldn't even take you a minute, maybe a few seconds. But after that, you decide how you want to split your time. Right? So RC sets, the my favorite approach is to first go on the big RC. So when I mean by big and small RCs, CAT is follows up again. We don't know what the pattern is going to be this year or the next year, but we can assume they go back to the 3-hour format because this year they went to the 2-hour format because of COVID reasons. They may or may not go back to the 3-hour format, but it's adaptable. So the methods that we speaking about is a 3-hour format, 1 hour per section. But of course, you can always modify it to how make it work, for the 40-minute sections. Right. So three major portions you see are the big, small, and the verbal ability section. What do I mean by big RCs, small RCs? Big RCs are your 5 or 6 question sets, and small RCs are your 3 or 4 question sets. In general, the reading is almost the same. So the time consumed in understanding the RC, choosing whether you want to attempt it or not. Again, verbal is a subject where most people attempt a large number of questions. So in general, you will attempt all the RCs, but let's say you're going to take some, especially for people who are weak in verbal, understand that leaving out RCs is not a bad option. So the second you drop a 5 or 6 question RC, you have a lot more time to spend on your other questions. So for people who are struggling in verbal, to understand that that is also an option. So all of that comes from your mocks and then the analysis. So I'll come back to that later, but this is how you build your strategy. You do analysis and then you come back to tweak your strategy, right? So this is my favorite, the way I had gone with. You have your big RCs, spend half an hour on that. So generally 2 big RCs, 2 small RCs, and you have 24 questions. The rest would be the verbal, or you would have a mix of all of this. So I would, if you have a 2 big RC, 2 small RC, I would generally spend my maybe 20 minutes. If it's 3 big RCs, 1 small RC, or 1 or 2 small RCs, then it'd probably be a 13, 15, 15, but depends on the number of questions. In general, a 13, 15, 15 split works, or a 40, 15, 10 split, one of these, or you can also have a 25, 15, 25 split, whatever, 20 split. So the split here is basically on what kind of RC you take. Why? I know a lot of people start with smaller RCs in the starting. The reason being, they prefer to read smaller amount. I was somebody who likes to read a lot, and I'd like to get big number of questions under my belt in the starting. So I start with big RCs. The reason I go to VA is something I was not very comfortable with. So, and VA is just 10 questions. You have quick one each, right? You don't really have to read much at that point. So I generally go to VA the second because I'm a bit tired of reading those big RCs and solving those questions. So VA would give me those small questions, knock a few of them out of the park, and then you go to the smaller RCs. But you can work anyway. I know a lot of people who follow this kind of a split. This is again when you had a 6 and 3 question split, right? For big RC, small RC. They do a big RC, the 6 question RC, 3 questions, 6 questions, 3 questions, 6 questions. This also works. So how you do the split, that's up to you. But the reason I say that you have to go with such a split and where you put VA, because one, I know a lot of people, see RCs are 24 questions. Obviously, you want to maximize your score there. A lot of people spend all their time on RCs and then miss out on the verbal section. You don't want, I mean, the VA part, and you don't want to do that either. And same way, you don't want to spend too much time on the VA part, especially when there are a lot of negative marks that you can get. For example, the parajumbles don't have negatives. But then obviously the chances of you getting a parajumble right if you guess even a bit is very, very low. You have to solve it. So if you're not very comfortable with those kind of questions, always make sure you guys finish your RC first, spend a bit of time in VN and switch back to RCs. Again, if you have 3 minutes left at the end, you can't do an RC problem. But verbal, on the other hand, if you've left a few questions at the end, you can pick off those 1 or 2 questions, right? So this depends on your strengths, like I said before. Your final strategy should depend on that. But these are just basic guidelines on the different strategies people use, and then you can pick one of them. Another one's a round strategy. Now, rounds is not something you use very much in verbal. You see more of that in DILR and quant. But round strategy is pretty simple. You see a question, you decide you either attempt it, or you mark it for review, or you leave it altogether. So this is again, your traditional approach in a slightly different way, where you have more than one round. You're going to keep doing this. So first, you're going to hit all the easy ones. Let's say the three set RC, a few verbal questions, and then you come back. You say, okay, this RC is easier to read. So you go for the bigger RC, but something you find more comfortable to use. Eventually, you go to the tougher RC or the tougher verbal questions which you've left for the end. So you can have 2, 3 rounds depending upon the situation. It's called the ABC approach as well, the easiest, slightly more medium, and then the tough ones, which you either may or may not attempt at the end. Verbal, in general, people attempt almost the entire paper, so round strategy really might not suit a lot of people, but you can try it out. I've tried out each and every strategy and eventually fixed on one which worked for me. I suggest you guys do the same. Let's go to DILR. Now, DILR is one where I'm going to show you only a couple of strategies. Honestly, the point here is these are all like your passages. You have a lot to read and then decide whether you want to attempt or not. So the traditional method, like I said before, you have three options. You read an entire passage, you decide you want to attempt it, you go ahead and attempt it. If you decide, you know what, it seems a little tough, I'll come back to it later, mark it for review, go ahead, or you leave it altogether. So this is the method I had used. I was pretty fast with DLR. I attempted 6+ out of 8 sets. So it made sense for me to go with the ordinary traditional method and not spend time at the start deciding whether, what sets to choose. Because like I said, I attempt 6 out of 8 sets. It doesn't make sense for me to choose which sets. But most people struggle in this because they can't attempt, let's say, more than 4 sets. So at this situation, what you've got to do is to make sure you pick the right set, all right, and you go forward. One of the tips I'd like to give you guys is always leave a DI set for the end. So basically, let's say you have 7, 8 minutes. If you have 7, 8 minutes, you can go forward and solve an LRDI set. But let's say you have 4 minutes. At that point, if you have a DI set with each sub question being a question all by itself, you can probably try and knock off a couple of sub questions there. So always leave a DI set for the end. That really helps you with your time management. All right, let's go to quant. All right, so quant is where most of the strategy comes into play. You have your traditional method, like I said, you attempt the initial set of questions, what you leave, you come back and attempt at the end. Then you have a multiple rounds. This is your ABC method. Like I said previously, ABC, easiest questions, slightly more time consuming, and C is basically your tough questions. So B is again questions where you know what you want to do. Your formulae, or rather, it's not direct formulae based, so you don't know what, but you know the kind of approach you have to take, and those are the kind of questions which will fall in your B category. Your C category are where you have an idea about the topic, but you're not. I mean, you don't get the logic of how to move forward and solve. So at this point, there's also a D which comes in, which you're supposed to leave at all times. Probably very difficult. You can't think of a logic. You probably don't even know the chapter very well. So those questions you leave altogether. All right. AIO obviously easy. It could be your formula-based questions, or the logic is very simple. You can get to it quickly. So again, the time spent per iteration would be more. For example, if I spend 20, 25 minutes on the easy questions, so 10 easy questions and I knock them out of the park, then my medium questions I probably spend 15 minutes per 5 questions, and then maybe the much more difficult ones will probably take me more time. So that's now, if you have 25, you have the 35 minutes, and you try to solve another maybe 5 to 7 questions, right? So you're maximizing on your easy ones. You already attempted 15 questions in 25 minutes. If you can go to the easy and medium ones, and then you leave the last ones, whether you can or not, right? So then comes your 10-10-10 strategy. This is something, especially for those people who struggle with time management. All right, this 10-10-10 strategy is where you break your entire 32, 34 questions into 4 different parts. Right, so I generally take it as an 8-8-8 questions, and probably the last would be 10 questions, right? So the first 8 questions, you take 2 minutes to decide what questions you want to solve, and then you spend the next 8 minutes solving it. So in 40 minutes, you end up going through 32 questions, and how many you attempt depends on the paper. So let's say you can get even 20 attempts, you're solid, right? The next 20 minutes, you work on the easier ones. What this does is it makes sure you attempt all the 34, or you at least look at all the 34 questions well, right, in time. You're spending 2 minutes on 8 questions. Again, you can go with different ways with the same strategy where you can go with the 15 minutes, 10, 12 questions method, where you go with 10, 10, and or 10, 10, 10, and then the remaining four, or basically 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 45 minutes, you're done with 30 questions, of which how many ever you've attempted depending on the type of the paper. All right. And then, of course, so this way again, what this does is that it makes sure that you've spent enough time on each question. It makes sure that you've read through each question. But this requires a very, very good skill of you knowing which question you can attempt and which question you can't attempt. All right. So for this requires a lot of practice. But if you're good at the subject, this makes a lot of sense, especially for those people who struggle to see all the questions and stuff like that. This is going to force you to make that decision, right? See, DILR, you can go through all the 8 sets and then make a decision of which sets you want to choose. But going through 34 questions and then deciding what questions you want to solve really doesn't make a lot of sense. So this is a very, very good way of moving forward. All right. Now that we've gone through how the basic different attempt strategies, what makes a mock so useful is that you're going to use each of these attempt strategies and see which works for you. You're going to see how each of these work for you, and but how would you realize if it worked or not? Not just purely based on your score. There are a lot of other parameters that come in, and that you get only from a good analysis. Right? So there are two kinds of analysis I'd like to speak about. One is at the end of each exam, right? Probably in a couple of days after you've taken the exam, you want to conduct an analysis. You want to see what kind of mistakes you made, what kind of questions you've left. Is your strategy working? Is your accuracy decent? Is your speed decent? Are you, if not, what are the kind of subjects you're supposed to be working on? What are the things which you're already good at, which you're supposed to maximize the next time? All of those kind of things. But what happens a lot of the time is when you conduct this first analysis, you see that you've made a lot of silly mistakes. Now, silly mistakes is part and parcel of this entire process. You are bound to make silly mistakes. Everybody makes silly mistakes, right? But what happens is a lot of the time, the questions we think are silly mistakes might not necessarily be a silly mistake. And you cannot figure that out from just one mock, right? So what I'd suggest is every time you've taken 10 mocks, do something called a comprehensive analysis. Take all your 10 mocks, section by section, conduct a thorough analysis again. Now, these are the questions you're seeing for the third or fourth time. So obviously, you're going to solve every question, but the point here is the kind of mistakes you made, that gets highlighted. And you start seeing patterns in these mistakes. Right? So figuring out a pattern in your silly mistakes is very important. Again, if there is no pattern absolutely whatsoever, it could be just calculation mistakes, and that's where the entire mental aspect comes into play. Where you're thinking straight, where if you're going into an exam hall nervous and all of those things. So those again, to a large extent, will be worked out if you've taken a decently good number of mocks. When you go for CAT, you go thinking it's nothing but a normal mock exam that you've taken before, right? So that's one important point. So try and figure it out. At least in my case, I figured out that a lot of silly mistakes that I made, especially in the verbal section, were purely because those mistakes fell into a certain pattern which I kept repeating, right? And that pattern, once I realized, I try to implement it in my in the actual CAT exam such that I don't make such silly mistakes. I made sure those are the checks I keep. Is it falling into this pattern or not, right? Then obviously you figure out your work strengths and weaknesses, which is very, very important. So basically every time you see a question, you have to decide whether it's easy and short, right? Easy and short, you attempt it. Let's say it's not easy, but it doesn't take that much time. You just need to get to the logic, right? Once you get the logic, it's a straightforward question. These are the questions you leave for later, all right? And then you have, of course, the lengthy questions which are easy. These also you leave for later. You attempt these easy, lengthy questions in your round 2. So round 1 has to be easy and short questions. Round 2 has to be easy but lengthy questions. Round 3 has to be questions where you're not getting the logic, but basically these are right. You know what the entire chapter is about at least. And finally, of course, is where you don't know what the subject is, uh, and you have no idea how to move forward. These are your difficult questions. See, when I mean easy, difficult, etc., these are things which depend on you. What you find easy, what you find difficult, is not the same for everybody else. So it's okay. Let's say your mock test series tells you that that question was easy, but you left it out. There could be multiple reasons, especially if you're not thorough with that chapter, it's going to be difficult for you. So you've got to go and work on this. Any question which falls in this category is something you've got to spend time working on. All right. And this is across topics. So when you say strengths or weaknesses, you got to figure that out in each and every subject. For example, in my case, uh, in verbal, I found out that more or less at least in the verbal ability part, right? Uh, I struggled with uh, para completion and para summary. So these are two things I was very weak at. The percentage of you know me getting that correct was very low. So what I did was eventually switch my strategy such that I attempt those questions at the very end. All right. So that is the reason you want to find out which topics you're weak at. Try improve, and even if you don't improve, your strategy has to be changed so that you leave those questions for the end. Right. Same thing in math. I was very weak at geometry. So my entire strategy was that I would attempt geometry only in my third round. First two rounds, I don't even look at geometry. So again, this is a 4 round strategy. My third round is when I look at geometry and decide whether I should attempt it or not. So same thing for you. Your weaknesses have to be pushed to the third round. Your strengths have to be gone. I mean, you have to attempt your strengths in the first or second round, right? So work those things out well, and then obviously you improve accuracy by. So your entire analysis is to see why you made mistakes. If you can work on those mistakes, try not to repeat those mistakes. Over time, your accuracy is obviously going to shoot. Uh, Personally, I've seen that happening. My accuracy used to be pathetic. I used to end up with 14, 15 mistakes. But after conducting good number of analysis of my mocks, it's slowly started increasing. Finally, in CAT, I had barely 4 mistakes out of 33 questions. So, improving accuracy is one of the reasons you conduct mocks analysis, right? And it happens also. Your analysis will eventually improve your accuracy. Again, when I say analysis, it also includes you going back and working on those uh, problematic areas, etc. So, right. And most importantly, the reason you need to conduct your analysis is so that you finalize your attempt strategy. Look, I've already spoken about the different possible attempt strategies. You can come up with your own strategy as well, and then you got to keep tweaking it till it becomes as and when you realize the kind of flaws you have. Your weaknesses, strengths are going to eventually help you fix your attempt strategy, whatever it is, right? Again, you will see few attempt strategies which are being pushed by certain people to try out all the possible attempt strategies in your mocks. Finally, what works for you is what matters. So try it out not just for one single mock, try it out for 2, 3 mocks. The reason I said you have to attempt 30 mocks is that say you take 2 or 3 mocks to finalize your strategy, you have 10 different strategies to try. Again, when I say 10 different strategies, you probably have 2 or 3 actual proper different strategies as such. The rest is all about tweaking. But a couple of mocks, or 2 or 3 mocks, should let you fix that strategy so that you will not deviate unconsciously. All right. Let's start with verbal. How do you analyze? What are the kind of uh, insights you can gain from analyzing a verbal mock? So you got to start by going through each RCVA question once more and try to understand each question from the author's perspective, especially for RCs. See, a lot of times what happens is that we read through the RC, we've got a hang of what's happening, and then we just go forward and attempt the questions. But it's not just about okay, I've seen this question, it's in this paragraph, let me go reread the paragraph and attempt it. Most often your RC has to be well read completely. You have to understand the context, you have to understand where the author is coming from, especially when you have cynical RCs, satirical RCs, funny RCs, where they're not really speaking their mind, but it's more like ha ha ha. this is what I mean to say, but you get that the irony wala feeling is what they're trying to figure out there. So for those kind of RCs, you got to understand the author's perspective, right? Here you could have, all right. Let me give you an example. So say I'm speaking about the elections, right? So I'm going to tell you, let's take the U.S. elections for example. I'm going to tell you, you know what, Trump was such a great ruler. So many Americans died because of it. Or he was so smart that he said you shouldn't wear masks. Here, while the statement by itself uh, shows that I'm supporting Trump, I mean, I'm telling you that he's good, but I'm telling you he's made so many mistakes. You got to figure that out. Again, here it's very clear, crystal clear to you, but a lot of the time the passage is slightly ambiguous because of that. And the options would be given in such a way that both perspectives are being played on. So understanding the author's perspective is imperative. All right? Make sure you're doing that. So if you find that you're not, you got to work on those sides. One of the major issues I had was I couldn't figure out the sarcasm in some of the author's sentences. Again, if you can never relate it to the real time situation at that point. For example, I remember reading one about people making fun of secularism. Now, while secularism is a very big subject, you don't expect a passage to come out where it's against secularism, right? It's there in our preamble. You don't expect, but that was the passage, right? It was completely communal. Now, obviously, the answers have to be answered from the author's perspective. So, whatever answer you're going to get would be communal. So, try and understand that. Get the feel. It's very, very important. All right. Check how many questions you solved via gut feeling. Like I said, this again happens when you relate to your real world feelings. Like, you know what? This seems right. So especially when we come down to two different options, both of them seem similarly right. You just go, you know what? My gut goes with this. I'm going to mark this, and that's when a lot of us make mistakes. Right? Bringing it down to two options is easy, but you got to rationally decide which is the correct option. So rationalize your thought process. Make sure whatever you said is whatever you attempt is data backed. And sometimes you got to, I mean, yes, there are times when you have to go with your gut feeling, but most of the time, pick, your, be rational or don't attempt. You see, verbal is a subject where a lot of people attempt. You're going to find a lot of people with 30 plus attempts. But if you're going to make 10, 15 mistakes, there's no point, right? So make sure you limit your attempts, especially when you're following gut feeling a lot. Make sure you limit your attempts and try and rationalize your thought process. Start eliminating options. So these are the four major buckets of mistakes that I've seen. These are taken from my own, my own analysis as well. So one is when the statement you've marked is out of scope. So if you're talking about, say, Bihar elections, and then there's an option which is talking about the American elections. Okay, now this is very obviously two different things. But let's say they bring in something which is similar but out of scope. If they're talking only about Bihar elections, you got to stay with Bihar elections. So make sure you're staying in scope of what the author has said, and you're not going to pull it and make your own, assumptions out of it. Subtle mismatches. So this happens quite often where they're talking about two different qualities, and their particular qualities. So if they say A is uh, good at this, B is good at this, the options might be inverse. And we won't realize because we're looking only at the big points, right? So you got to make sure that that doesn't happen. It'll be very subtle, so you got to catch those subtle mismatches, especially when you come down to two options. That's when these mismatches really come into play. Use of extreme language, this I think is little obvious. Anywhere where they say only, always, all, never, and this is not just for verbal, this is also for your DLR. You got to be very careful when you see such options, because if you find even one possibility where the option can be wrong, that's wrong. The option is wrong altogether. All right, which is why only, always, never, all these extreme options are something you got to stay away from. All right, they say some, for example. That means you can have negative scenarios as well. The only good thing about any option where you see extreme language is that it's very easy to remove such options, right? You get one possibility which is against that option, you can remove it. So keep that in mind. Correct but irrelevant information. So if the question is asking for something, make sure you're answering to that exactly. The four options, it could be relevant to the overall passage, but might not be relevant to your question. So make sure it is relevant, it is accurate, and it is for that question only. If you can sort out these four buckets, your verbal in general, especially RCs, would be set. All right. Now DILR. So see, DILR, it's all about choosing the correct set or choosing the correct sets and all of that. So analyze your mistakes. Why you're going wrong. See, DILR and quant. This is very important because there is rarely any gut feeling or there is rarely any ambiguity coming there. You solve something and then you mark, right? So analyze if you ever made any mistake. A lot of times we read some part of the question wrong, or we understand, we interpret the data wrong, which to an extent is okay. Make sure you don't repeat that, but or try not to repeat it. But those are okay. But the problem comes in when your entire concept is wrong, and it happens a lot too, especially in DI where you read the graphs wrong because you've understood it wrong. So analyze and see why exactly you made that mistake. Is it something very naive, something you wouldn't normally do, or is it something you would have done even when you're checking? So when you analyze DILR, I would prefer starting with the questions you've left out, then go to questions you've made mistakes, and finally reattempt the questions you've got correctly and see if you're getting the correct answer again. So in these two scenarios, if you do come up with the same answers you've done before, right? It's good here, it's not good here. If you're coming up with the wrong answer again, your entire approach is wrong. Either your approach is wrong or you made some serious scathing mistake which you're making again, and you can't afford to do that. Silly mistakes, when you attempt the second time, you generally do not tend to make the same silly mistake. So do not look at the solution till you solve it a second time. So that is why I said, see, this itself will take you more than an hour. Because 1 hour you couldn't solve it the first time, there is no chance you're going to solve it 1 hour the second time. So take your time. Even if it takes you a couple of hours for one section alone, it's okay. But make sure you go through every single question. Don't leave a single one. Make sure you understand the solution for every one of them. If you don't, make sure you ask somebody, which is why having a good peer group matters, right? Or you can always ask your teachers. There are 101 ways you can get this done, but make sure you do. Even a quick Google search for a lot of questions will get you the answer. Work on picking the correct and easy sets. What I mean by correct and easy sets, sets which you are very comfortable. For example, I was very, very comfortable with the data interpretation side. I loved looking at graphs, tables, and figuring out stuff from there directly. That was my favorite part of DIL. So my entire strategy revolved around picking the maximum number of DI sets. Even LR, what worked for me was what I was trying to pick. For example, things like game theory, things like arrangements. These are some things I really love to do, and these are something which were, so for me those were easier compared to some of the sets which might be in general called easy. So you got to work on that. Again, in general, a lot of sets, especially in CAT, you'll find a couple of sets which are dead easy. So for DLR, I'll be conducting a session on Friday where I'll be going through few of the CAT questions that have been asked over the years, the easy, the medium, the hard. Again, these will be my classifications, might differ per person, but I just want to show you there where how easy sets are there which people don't notice, and there might be very difficult set which looks very easy. All right. Thing about DLR is accuracy is of paramount importance. DLR is not a subject where you're going to attempt all the questions. Very few people I think maybe hardly one or two people every mock would probably manage to even attempt all the questions, right? If you do it properly. So accuracy is of paramount importance. You attempt 20 questions and you attempt 20 of them right, you're sitting at a 99.5 percentile out of 32%. Right? That is a solid score. Aim to get all of them right, because that is going to give you a high percentile even if your attempts are less. You attempt just 20 questions, that's 5 sets, all right, and you're sitting at 99.5 percentile. There is no other subject you can get such a high score so easily, right? Similarly, getting 7 sets, 8 sets, even attempting all 7 sets is going to be very, very tough. You find maybe a handful of people doing that. So why do you want to make? I mean, you can't afford to make a mistake. To be honest, you're attempting only three, four, five sets. You cannot afford to make even a single mistake. This is something which worked both PLR and quant. Make sure you have a notebook with the kind of mistakes you make. This helps. Uh, Hello, Yash. Okay, so this helps you. It's not just uh, you know a one-time thing. These mock mistakes which you make, you tend to repeat it. So having a mistake books, take, taking a look at your mistakes once in a while. When I say once in a while, probably once in a month, right? Look at all the last five mocks you made, the kind of mistakes you made, and see if you're repeating them, right? That that helps a lot. Eventually, even before CAT, right? Your uh, finally, what you're going to do is just look through all those questions you've got wrong and try not to do that in CAT, right? Let's go to quant. Quant, see, when you're quant, you have 34 questions in an hour, right? Obviously, uh, again, you're gonna follow the same strategy as you did for DLR when you're checking. When you're analyzing your mock. Start with the questions you missed out, then go on to questions where you got them wrong because you didn't know, right? See, sorry. So you start with questions you've left out altogether. Then you go to questions where you knew you could have. I mean, it seemed, or rather, you made some sort of a headway into the question, but eventually you couldn't arrive at the final answer, right? Then you go into those questions which you got wrong, and there you got to split it up into, say, a calculation silly mistake or a serious conceptual error, and then you follow it up with all the answers you've already marked. So quant one question will have a lot of. Give me a second, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Right. So, so quant you'll have a lot of uh, approaches for the very same question, right? So your entire analysis is to come up with one, uh, what what are your strengths and weaknesses, and also to come up with different approaches to the same problem. See, uh, your CAT questions aren't going to repeat, but the type of questions will, which means your approaches to a particular question. You have four different approaches. There might be a question where one of those approaches don't work. You have other two or three approaches to bank on. All right. Make sure you do that. Make a list. Again, I'm not a fan of formulae, but there are a few chapters where you have no option but to learn a formula. So make a list of any formula that you've missed in mocks before going to the exam. Finally, you can always just reread it or reread this occasionally before taking any mock. Just go through these quick formulas. It helps a lot, especially with some formula where you have no option to understand. Right? But again, like I said, understanding the logic of each question, like DILR, is very, very important. Because if you're not going to get the basic logic behind each question, you're not going to be able to move forward, right? And the second you get the logic, what kind of approach you want to follow also follows that, right? So if you get the logic, you can come up with n number of approaches, and these approaches will obviously help you finally when you attempt the next mock or finally CAT. Next, I want to speak about inherent bias. This generally happens with your right. So, what do I mean by an inherent bias? Right. So, in my case, anyway, I always preferred, at least in the starting when I was taking CAT, I preferred to. I wanted to attempt uh, geometry questions a lot, right? Because I felt, you know what, इतने साल पढ़ा हूँ मतलब यार आसान है geometry हो जाएगा engineer and all that. Similarly, I didn't want to attempt stuff like these, what do you call it? Give me a second. Time and place, time and work, and all of those questions. I always found them very irritating. But so this was an inherent bias. right? That I wanted to attempt these, I didn't want to attempt the other two. And what I figured out while after mocks and analysis was that most of the questions I attempted geometry were wrong, right? I was making mistakes left, right, and center, and I was actually pretty weak at this. And similarly, these were questions which were very easy to attempt. I'd be a fool not to attempt these questions. So eventually, I had to work out my strategy in such a way that geometry I would attempt towards the end, try and worked on those kind of topics more. So do those things. You have 1 year. 1 year is solid. Most of you guys will start taking mocks in May. That's 6 months. Make sure you figure out these kind of things from your analysis. Conduct a comprehensive analysis at the end, not just per mock, but rather 10, 15, 20 mocks together. These will help you, like I said in the start, prepare patterns, understand patterns, and then work those out. All right. So important notes, tips I want to tell you guys. Try and finalize your CAT attempt strategies. So once you get something that's working for you, it's all about small tweaks. That's okay. But try and figure out the larger strategy overall which works for you. Right? For you, it has to be your own. What works for you wouldn't be the same for anybody else. वो देख लेना. Work on your weak areas यार. वही है ना, मतलब you attempt a mock. It's not just to see what kind of rank or score you get. You just figure out your weak areas and improve. ठीक है. Everybody is going to keep improving. Your mock scores will be like this. ऐसा नहीं होगा कि you start off. You're going to start off plateau, or rather keep moving up down like that. Then you go up again, move up down, up onwards. तो ये वाला जो plateau होगा ना, you'll find that to be that for a while. So it's about moving from one level to the other. Read questions twice. Okay, these general things, right? Especially if the questions are convoluted, make a note. Make a couple of notes. Uh, this happened, especially in CAT 2019. If you guys have looked at the verbal paper, you'll see that the questions are okay, like this. Which of the following, all of the following statements do not support the passage except. तो वो तो फिर भी आपको पता चल जाएगा कि do not support except मतलब it supports. But here there was a question which says that all of the following weakens the passage except. See, about now the point is this is slightly convoluted because any option which doesn't support necessarily doesn't mean weaken. It could have nothing to do with the entire passage but still be the right answer. Similarly, if they say all of these weakens except, that again does not have need to strengthen. So वो वाले small things are very important. So read the question twice, and if you find the question to be convoluted, make sure you make a note of it. One in the exam, and two while you're analyzing as well. So that before you go for CAT or before you go for your next mock, you at least take a good look at it and go ahead, right? Next, very important, make sure you attempt previous year CAT papers as mocks only towards the end. अभी आप करोगे, you'll think the overall level of CAT is much lower. ऐसा नहीं होता. Your mocks are generally tougher than CAT, and that's true. ठीक है? Which is why you got to attempt mocks, improve there, and then you can always towards the end take this as practice. तब आपको थोड़ा बहुत आइडिया भी होगा यार. ठीक है, मेरे को 200 आ रहा है, which is a 99.9 plus. मेरे को 150 आ रहा है, which is a 99 plus. मेरे को 100 plus आ रहा है, which is a 90 plus, etc. ठीक है, तब ज्यादा बेटर आइडिया होगा. Now you might be getting 90 and में आपको 200 आ सकता है. So it doesn't make sense to attempt a previous CAT paper now, but make sure you attempt it as mock towards the end, probably a month before CAT or something like that. ठीक है? Yeah, more of this CAT is a marathon, not a sprint. You have a year to go, one entire year. काफी time है. You'll probably be taking mocks 6 months from now. So आपका पढ़ाई करो, finish your stage 1, which is your studies, and then you can go to your stage 2, which is practice, and finally mocks is stage 3, which is your last 6 months stuff. Probably start sometime in June or May or June. ठीक है यार. Most importantly, any part of your journey, don't give up. हो सकता है कि आपको बहुत खराब mocks आए. Doesn't matter. My mock scores were worst just before I ended up with the best possible score I could get in CAT. उसके पहले जब when my mock scores was good in 2018, मेरे को अच्छा score नहीं आया था CAT में. So there is no correlation between you. Let me make this very clear, right? There is no correlation between mock scores, mock test scores, and final CAT scores. Okay, keep this in mind. So mock test is your playground. Mock test you will take to analyze your mistakes, improve by yourself. Overall, आपका rank वगैरह doesn't matter to a large extent. Yes, your ranks etc. are more indicative of how well you're doing compared to your you know the rival aspirants, and also it gives you an idea how tough the mock was in general. So what happens is, at least in my case, when I found the mock tough, large number of people found it easy, and vice versa. Yeah, that depends on your strengths, your weaknesses. That is set largely according to your strengths, you're going to do well. As vice versa. For example, 2018 में भाई क्वांट में इतने ज्यादा वो आया था ना ज्योमेट्री क्वेश्चंस, मुझसे हो ही नहीं रहा था. On the other hand, when 20 sorry that's in 2018, so 2019 quant had very few geometry questions, and whatever geometry questions were very easy. So I managed to score pretty high. तो वो वाला डिफरेंस रहता है कि is that paper more suitable for you or not. For example, 2019 अब verbal देख लो, it was a pain to read, but and the questions were also very convoluted, but the answers were open. ठीक है, if you could go, if you're somebody who reads well, आपको वो set है, it wouldn't be hard. But if you were someone who couldn't, I mean, who doesn't read much in general, तो आपको बहुत मुश्किल लगता होगा यार, the passages are so hard, I won't be able to answer and things like that. ठीक है, the final few things I hope you guys do, like daily करो, make sure you read मतलब न्यूज़पेपर्स, मैगजीन्स या जो भी नॉवेल्स, जो भी है, मेक श्योर यू मेक इट अ हैबिट. मतलब रोज करो and keep targets. So I used to I want to read 100 pages, 150 pages, etc. a day. Eventually creating that sort of a reading habits. Similarly for quant or DILR, I would be like मैं इतने passages करूँगा, I would sorry मैं इतने questions करूँगा, yeah, I would do X number of sets. Again, DLR to a large extent, if you do puzzles, etc., it helps you come up with that sort of methodical process, the methodical thinking process, which is very important. So, वो भी थोड़ा बहुत करो. I would say Sudokus, etc., will really help. Yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. 1 year, you have a lot of time. Make sure you do your. I mean, there's no time to start like the present. Start. Again, your mocks and cat वगैरह यार थोड़ा बाद ही आएगा. This is just something for you to keep in mind. If there's anything you guys would like to ask, please do. We have 5 more minutes. I'll try and help out as much as I can. Uh, I have one more class on the Friday where I'll be talking about an introduction to DALR, the different attempt strategies, and we'll take a few questions as well. I'll show you how I would attempt, how I would tackle the question, which may or may not be the way you'd see others tackle. You can come up with your own method, all of that, but just some way I would go forward. I'll take old CAT questions itself. They're probably the best resource possible. And yeah, that's pretty much it. आपको कुछ है तो बता दो. I think I'll stop the YouTube stream.